Hey guys, Morgan's Maintenance. Today's video I'm going to be working at my own house. This is part of my garage, over my garage. If you haven't been watching those videos, essentially my existing garage is inside of this building right here. And then I have a newer section. Well, part of the reason why I did this is that eventually I wanted to add a mini split to work in my existing space so that I can heat and cool that. That's where I keep my materials like caulking and stuff like that, so that way I don't have to take it in and out of my house during the winter time. And this is going to be more comfortable for me working in that particular space. Well, TOSOT reached out to me and asked me if they could help me with this and send me this mini split, so I am marking this paid promotion. They're not paying me in any way to make this video, but they did send me this for free, so that's why I'm marking it. So I do want to thank TOSOT for sending out this unit. Well, this is a 12,000 BTU 230 volt unit. I believe this unit is rated to work up to 750 square feet. My building in there is 20 by 20 that I'm going to be heating and cooling, so this should be plenty for that. So a few things before we get into the install. I'm going to treat this like a watch me work. I'm going to put on my head cam and basically film everything that way. Do a voiceover later because it's cold out here. I'm probably going to be sniffling a lot. It's also windy. I don't think the recording and me talking and stuff like that's going to be good. So I'm just going to record all the footage, do a voiceover of the install. But I did already install the outside unit as far as the wall mount and then also setting the unit. Everything's going to be different on that for different people. Depends on what wall mount you buy. I put mine into concrete block. You might be going into something else. I also installed my disconnect because that's something that's going to be different based on your unit, what size wiring, all those kinds of things like that. I did run a 10-3 wire out to mine, but I didn't need to. I just so happened to have that wire. Wasn't a long run, so that's what I went ahead and did to kind of future-proof this in case I do put something out here later that needs a little bit more amperage. And another thing I want to mention before we get into it, because I'll probably get some comments, there is a dent kind of in this area right here that you'll probably see throughout the process. That's actually way less than what it was. So UPS delivered the indoor unit perfectly fine. Box looked just like it probably came off the shelf. Indoor unit, different story. It looked like that box had been through the ringer whenever I got it. Opened it up, saw those dents. TOSOT would have fixed that for me, but it really doesn't bother me. I was able to take it out. I got this for free, so I wasn't going to be picky about it. They did say that they are working on their packaging to make it kind of more delivery driver proof as far as for them bouncing it around and stuff like that. So they are working on that. And the last thing before we get into the install, I am going to tell everybody I am not an HVAC tech. So I do work on HVAC stuff, primarily on the electrical side. So there's a lot of tools that I didn't have to be able to make this happen that I had to buy, that you will have to buy as well if you're doing this as a homeowner. We'll take a look at those and then we'll get into this install. So some of the things that I purchased in order to do this install, and I'll put links in the descriptions for these. I didn't own any of these, so I did have to buy a vacuum pump in order to vacuum the system before I released the refrigerant and to check for leaks. Bought some nylog for the connections. Also bought a manifold gauge set. I already own one of those, but I've had other refrigerants and stuff in it. I basically bought a set. I'm going to use that strictly for vacuums in case I install any more of these in the future. I also had to buy some different adapters. I don't know that I'm going to need these, but these are for R32, so I went ahead and bought them just in case I do. And then the one thing that's kind of iffy, if you want to or not, I think it's a good idea. I did buy a micron gauge, but this right here costs more than all the rest of that. I bought the CPS VG200 just so I can make sure I get down to that right micron level, and then also I can kind of check for leaks in that way as well to see if I lose vacuum. And then some of the tools that I already owned that you're going to need a torque wrench, drill, impact, level, adjustable wrench, some hole saw, stuff like that. Just your typical tools that you're going to need, along with, I'm sure, some other stuff that we'll get into. But again, I'm working at my house where my truck is, my garage is, whatever it is I run into, I'll have it. I'm not going to be in a super big hurry on this. It's kind of what I plan my whole day around, so I'm not like efficiency minded with this right here. I'm just going to make sure that I do it in the way that I want to do it. And again, it's going to be a little bit different than some other people's installs because I'm coming through, you know, a building into the inside of a building and then getting to the outside. So I might do things a little bit differently than if you're installing yours like on an outside wall or something like that. But enough talk, enough intro. Let's go ahead and get into installing this thing. So I'm going to be doing it a little bit different than some people in the fact that I'm setting the line set on my outside unit first and then working my way in. And that's because most people, you know, you have a certain spot inside your house where it has to go between windows or something like that. Well, you have 16 foot worth of line set. I wanted to basically move mine as far in as I could. So as far as this line set's going to go, that's going to dictate where my inside unit's going to actually be. So I'm going to set the line set on the outside first. This is actually my first time using this Spider hole saw kit. I've had it for quite some time. Got it on clearance at Lowe's. Never had used it before. So here I'm having to go up and at an angle because you can see those hookups down there kind of angled up. I didn't want to come like straight out and have to do some kind of crazy bend causing me to kink the line set piping. So this spider hole saw, fantastic. I've seen this on Stud Pack and a bunch of other channels, but the way that you just pull them plugs out works really, really well. So I'm going through my outside layer of LP smart siding, and then now I'm going through my zip sheeting layer, and I'm right there in a stud bay right next to a wall that I'll eventually cover all this with like an access so that I can get to this line set later if I need to. So now that I've got the hole drilled, basically going to go over here, get the 2 line sets. Again, they're 16 foot. They're provided by TOSOT as far as in the kit with the outdoor and indoor unit. Going to kind of straighten out at least a long enough section of it to be able to stick it through the hole that I just drilled right there by the outside unit. Now working on that second. This is that smaller diameter pipe. Definitely bends a whole lot easier, but then also means you have to be a little bit more careful with it as you're bending it, because it's going to be easier to kink as well. Now I'm also running the signal cable. So this is the cable that comes from the outside unit into the indoor unit. So of course now I've got to run this as well, you know, while I'm running this line set. So I'm going to go ahead and get that poked out. And I think it's exactly the same length. So I'm assuming I didn't measure it or anything, but I think you essentially get 16 feet or so worth of that as well. So now that I got that out, I'm going to go ahead and take off these covers as far as where you're going to hook up the line sets to the unit. They had some caps to help keep them sealed off, basically, while the unit was in transport and all that kind of stuff. Keep stuff from getting down inside of those. Now I'm going to start kind of trying to bend the line set, again being very careful with it, not to do anything abruptly. Basically I'm trying to get it from that hole down here to line up with where it enters the unit. And as I said, I'm not a person who works with line set. You know, typically my extent of HVAC work is somebody calls, I ask them what it's doing. If it's not running 100% like at all, like not doing something, then it's probably an electrical issue, and I go look at it. But I always tell them up front, I don't really do refrigerant or any of that kind of stuff. So this isn't something I typically do. While I was bending that, I kept having problems with this in here kind of moving around on me. So I decided to come in here and tie that off just temporarily to my wall, just to keep that moving. So that way, whenever I'm bending things in there, I don't come in here and this be a big disaster as far as it's like moved the wrong way or something like that. And then now I'm going back, getting those to line up. Once I feel like it's pretty good, I'm going to go ahead and get out the nylog and put some on both the mating surfaces, as far as on the unit itself, and then also on the actual line set before I hook these up. This is just to help to make sure that you get a good seal. And it says thread sealing on it, but I've watched enough HVAC guys do this. Multiple of them say, you know, you don't need to put it on threads. That doesn't do anything, which is true. Basically, your seal is right there on the fittings itself, right there on the ends. So I'm just going to hand tighten that one for now, get that snugged up by hand, and then start working on the smaller one. And then that way I can kind of basically do the same thing, rinse and repeat. I'm going to get this one formed the way that I like it. This one's definitely a lot easier, this smaller line, to get it exactly how you want it. And I'm just going to do the same exact thing, put the nylog on those, and then hand tighten that and get that one on there as well. This is also a time where you want to inspect those flare fittings and see if you see any kind of like abnormal things about them before you do it. And then if you see something messed up on it, you're going to have to cut them off and redo it. I don't have the tools to do that, even if I needed to. But if you do see that and you don't have the tools, there's no sense hooking it up. You're going to have a problem. So you'd want to go ahead and either buy the tools, do it another day, call an HVAC friend, you know, something along those lines. Now I'm going to look up the torque specs. It's got Newton meters and foot-pounds in the inspections. So I'm using a torque wrench with some crow's feet. To be honest with you, this was a little bit of a pain using that kind of a wrench, especially inside where I'm between some studs and stuff. If it was me and I do it over again, if somebody asked me to put in one of these or I put another one in for myself, I'm going to buy a digital adjustable wrench, torque wrench, and use that. I think that'd be a whole lot easier for a lot of situations. So now I'm going to start rolling the line set out as far as I can get it over on my wall to my existing building to see where the location is, you know, that I'm going to end up putting my indoor unit. Just seeing where it's going to kind of come to after I get it 100% rolled all the way out. So again, I'm letting this dictate really where I'm putting the inside unit. So now you can see I'm over here pretty close to the shutters of an old exterior window on my existing building. So that gives me an idea kind of where I need to be at inside. So this is the wall that I'm going to put it on. I'm going to put it up there in that white section. I've got some framing everywhere where those green caps are. So I made myself a board that's a little bit smaller than the unit itself. It will span that framing. I'm going to screw that up there with these structural screws, and then I'm going to screw the actual mount to that to secure it, because I don't really have a lot of framing in the areas where the mount's actually going to go. And then I also don't really have any kind of sheathing or drywall or something where I could use anchors as well. So basically I'm going to make myself my own little backing plate before I put the brace on. I just sandwiched 2 pieces of some LP soffit material together. I've got those glued together. I glued them together a few days ago. That way it brings me out flush with my pickets as far as my wall covering. And then that way too, later on, if I do some other sort of wall covering up here, I can kind of go around my unit and it's still going to be stuck out the same amount as my existing wall. Using the new M18 Surge, really like it. This LP stuff's really hard to get screws started in it, and it's not really made for screws. I think it's made more so for nails. Now you got to unscrew this screw. I think they put that in there just for shipping purposes, because you don't put it back in, because obviously you're not going to be able to get to that screw once you put it up on the wall. So now you're going to take out the bracket, and then I'm going to go up and measure how far in I want the one bracket leg to be. I took some measurements on the unit just so I got an idea of where I'm going to place it at. Get one screw in it. Now I'm going to get my level out, put it on those 2 bottom legs there that the unit sets in. It actually clips into it a little bit, and start working on getting it level. It's actually a little bit hard to get this level because the screw holes, the slots are actually pretty big for most screws. And I'm using kind of the same size screws that they provided. They only gave you like 4 or 5, so it's not really intended to put a bunch of screws in this thing. But so because that slot's so big, it's going to move up and down some. But I kept having a hard time getting it not to be 0.05, which to the eyeball, if you look at that bubble on 0.05, nobody would ever know that. But because I got a digital level, you know, I got to get to that 0.00. Now I'm just going to go around and put in a few more screws just to make sure it's plenty secure. Basically putting some in the middle, some on the 4 corners, everywhere where I think that something might happen where it catches that unit, just to keep that bracket from pulling off. But the unit itself is really, really light. Like, I don't think you have to have very much holding power. Now that I got that set up there, I'm going to start bending this out. Same thing, I'm being super careful. I may be being too careful for all I know. Again, I just don't typically work with this, so I'm being overly cautious when bending that, but you got to bend it straight out so that you can put it through the hole. Now I'm also pulling the drain out because my intent was to, and I'll explain that in a little bit, was to bring the line set out one side and bring the drain out the other side. Typically you're just going to bring it all out one hole, but again, since I'm not working on the outside wall, I had a different idea in mind, but I end up actually running it all through the same hole anyway. So I took some measurements on the unit off of these brackets. Where should that hole be? So this is the side over here that the line set would go out, and then again this over here is what I'm marking for. I was going to put the drain hose out that side, but again I end up not doing that. Drilling the hole, you want to drill this at a slight angle so that the drain line will go downhill. I don't do mine as much of an angle, but that's because I thought I was going to take the drain line out the other side. But it's okay because of my wall assembly, I'm able to make it go downhill because I don't really have much interior wall, so I just cut out more once I get to the other side. That's why this siding's not coming out of this spider hole saw as easy as what it did outside those, because I started out going at an angle, and that made that little extra piece get stuck in there pretty good, your little plug. So I ended up having to beat that one out. So I have 2 layers of that I've got to go through, because again I doubled that up to get my thickness the same as my wall covering. So there's the second plug, and then now I've got some, I think it's 2-inch foam inside of there. That's what I insulated this building with, my existing building, before I put the walls up. So I'm going through that as well. And then once I get through that, I've got a small, that exterior metal that I've got to go through. So a bunch of things that you got to go through to get to the outside, but at least it's not brick. That takes a little bit of time to get through some brick and block and all that kind of stuff. Now I'm going to change hole saw size because again, I'm thinking I'm going to run the drain out of this side. And the reason why, and I mentioned at the end, is because it only comes with like an extra 6 foot of drain hose. So no matter what, I'm not going to get outside with the drain hose that's provided, because again, they intend that you're going to put it on the outside wall. So I'm going to have to transition to PVC at some point and then get that outside anyways. But I just kind of wanted it to come out at a different place than everything else, so that I wasn't working right there around everything else. So that was my hope. But as I'm drilling through here, I remembered I've got a stud back there. I mean, obviously that's where I screwed my backing plate up to. But I thought, well, I'll just go ahead and drill all the way through that stud. That doesn't really matter because it's just a stud turned flat. But then I remembered everywhere where I've got those studs, this is an old metal pole carport style building. So there's an actual like 2.5-inch, 3-inch metal pole behind that stud as well. So I was like, well, I'm not going to get through that. So I just abandoned that. Decided I was going to go ahead and just run everything through this one hole. So back here on the back side, I kind of wanted to cut this metal away from my hole just so I didn't have that sharp edge. That way if I got vibration on my line set later, or the drain hose, or the electric cord that I'm running through there. So I ended up taking out a square of metal that was around that hole just to keep that from maybe happening in the future. Now I'm just straightening up my line sets as much as I can, making sure I've got them where I want them. And then I'm going to go back inside, hook up the drain hose. So again, they give you, and I think it's like a 6-foot hose that you're going to put on there and run it out. I'm going to zip tie those together just so I'm not having to, deal with that later. Hopefully that's going to help me out. Now I'm going to pick up the unit, take it up there, try to get everything fed through the hole, and then get this stuck on the bracket. This would be definitely easier, probably with 2 people, although the way that mine's up over that shelf, I don't know that I could have had 2 people necessarily up here very easy anyways, but it's not too bad because again, like I said, it's not real heavy. I'm able to basically hold it almost with, one hand if I need to. So I'm going to go ahead and fish all that extra drain hose through first, just to get that started. I've got that line signal wire back in. That's what I did while I was on that other side of the wall as well. And then now I'm going to stick the line set stuff through the hole. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to lift it up and put it on that bracket. And then I'm going to start fishing. I'm going to leave it kind of held out a little bit and try to fish that wire back through the inside. This was actually pretty difficult. I ended up having to go get my Milwaukee extended reach to grab a hold of the wire because I couldn't fit my fingers back in there in order to pull it through the unit so I could wire up the indoor unit. And my hat cam is basically just picking up that right there, so that's why I went over to that footage. Every now and then I stuck my phone up just in case in areas where I thought this might happen, so that you'd be able to have some footage of me doing something. So here, just wiring up the indoor unit based on what the instructions say. It's just 3 wires and a ground, putting the cover back on, and then just buttoning up everything from the inside. Now moving back outside, you can kind of see the square hole I cut. I also took a piece of PEX pipe, slid it down the middle, and put it over the metal on the bottom. That way, hopefully, again, my cord and the drain hose and all that stuff won't rub on that. Now I'm taking out the caps. You can probably hear that, I'm assuming, nitrogen coming out from the indoor unit where they were leak testing it. And now essentially I'm going to have to hook up the line set from the indoor unit to that line set that I have hooked up to the outdoor unit. And my DJI camera on my hat up there is basically just staring at that, you know, square hole, and I didn't know it, so that footage is no good. But same process as what I did outside, taking the nylog, putting it on the fittings, connecting those two together, and then you're going to take your torque wrench, but however in here you need an adjustable wrench as well because you got 2 fittings. You need to hold back on one while you torque down the other. And it's a little bit difficult, again, inside of this space with the torque wrench, the style that I was using. Again, if it was me, again, I'd buy a digital adjustable torque wrench. I think that would make it a lot easier. But here is the finished deal. I've got them hooked up right there so you can see that. That's basically what you're going to look for. Now moving to the outside unit, I'm going to take off the cap as far as the service port, where I'm going to hook my micron gauge on. So here you have to have an adapter to go to mini split. So one of those adapters, these actually came with the gauge set that I bought, the one that I'm hooking onto the mini split. I ended up not using a couple of the adapters that I bought. I think that's strictly for if you're adding refrigerant for the R32. So again, I've got the CPS micron gauge. I've got that hooked up to the adapter to the mini split. And then I went ahead and bought a ball valve to put on the other side of that micron gauge. That way I can shut it off right there, and then I don't have to worry about stuff coming back in my gauges and all that. So that's not something you have to have. I just bought that because I thought it'd be a good idea. So hooking up the blue hose to the micron gauge, or to the line that my micron gauge is hooked up to the service port, getting all those, making sure I've got them kind of snugged up, all those fittings. Now hooking up the yellow hose to the vacuum itself. I'm going to open up the gauge, and then I'm going to turn on the vacuum. There, you can see those dents a little bit there in that picture. Now I'm just going to let that kind of run for a while. You can see the micron gauge kind of going down. I think I show you what time it is here in a little bit to give you an idea. But while I'm pulling the vacuum, might as well do something besides just sit here and twiddle my thumbs. So I'm going to go ahead and start making the electrical connections outside. So I have to hook up the actual cord from the inside unit, and then I also have to hook up the cord from the other. So 1242, that's whenever I started the vacuum process. So here I'm looking up the wiring diagram in the user manual just to make sure that I hook up the right ones. Because inside, basically, you could tell it was color to color. Out here, it's not so much. And then there's also some, the spots where you're going to hook up your incoming power as well. So now that I got that fed, I'm going to open up my disconnect, pop out the knockout, and start putting in my service line into the unit as well. Again, this is a 230 volt. So I'm going to be using a red wire, black wire as my lines, and then also a ground wire hooked into the ground. and they did provide, you know, a cable for this that looks just like that other line, the black cord, but I just prefer using this right here mainly for that elbow and those connections to get that good seal. And I'm using 10 gauge wire, not necessary for this unit either. I think it pulls 7 amps if I remember right. Now I'm checking to see where I need to cut off my liquid tight. Marking that because I had to go to my truck and get my tubing cutters. So with this, I'm just going to barely go into it and then just use that and kind of spin it around to cut through. I don't want to cut all the way through because obviously that's going to cut the wires, and I don't want to nick the wires. So that takes a little bit of finesse, just making sure that you don't go too far. But there's quite a bit of room in there for those wires, so it's not like if you just barely cut through, you're still going to get a wire. And then I just finish it off by snapping it. Putting the end connector back on. And then putting that into the outdoor unit cover. It's got basically 2 spots there. They kind of have it set up where you could knock out the whole thing and then run your wires inside of a kind of clamp inside of there if you wanted to do that, but I prefer to do it this way. It just seems like it's a little more secure. So taking that lock nut, running it through and getting that locked on there. And then I'm going to get out my favorite lock nut pliers, which are my snap-on Talon grips, the 7-inch. They work phenomenal for this. Let's make sure I get that snugged up. Now I'm checking the micron gauge. I'm going to go ahead and shut it off at that ball valve. You'll see it kind of go back up a little bit. I'm going to turn the vacuum off. And now essentially I'm going to wait and see if it holds that vacuum. It kind of stopped at 270 at 12:58. So whatever time it was I started the vacuum, it's now 12:58. So it didn't take very long to get down to the 270. It actually bumped right up to 280 right after I got done filming that. And 280 is kind of where it stays. So still going to finish the wiring while I'm waiting to see if that micron gauge changes at any point from 280 to, you know, something else, to see if I'm actually losing vacuum pressure, because again, that would let me know that I've got a leak. So stripping my wires, again, I'm using 10 gauge here. Didn't have to for this unit. That's just what came with my whip. And then I had to go to the truck and get my crimper. And then all my crimp connectors, I keep those in a pack out container. And then I'm going to crimp some forks on the ground wire and the 2 line ends. These are the Klein ratcheting crimpers. I really haven't used any other crimpers since I bought those. They're phenomenal in my opinion. Now I'm going to start wiring the unit. So again, you have your indoor to the outdoor unit wiring. That is 3 different wires along with a ground wire, so 4 wires total. And then I've got my line 1, line 2, and a ground wire as far as incoming power. And based on the wiring diagram, this one book does several models, and it's got a couple different diagrams in there. So you need to make sure you pay attention to what unit you're wiring up, which wires go where, those kinds of things. So don't screenshot like a picture of mine and wire yours the same way unless you have the same exact unit. Like if you've got a different unit, it could be different. So pretty simple though. Everything goes where it goes based on the wiring diagram. Checking that gauge, still saying 280. So here is the wiring diagram for my particular unit in the manual, and then there are the wire connections made up. Now I'm just going to get that cover put back on. 4 screws, magnetic mat coming in clutch here, holding those screws the whole time, because if any of them fell off and went in the grass, that would have been a nightmare trying to find those. Kind of a little bit muddy. We just had some snow melt. Now I'm going to finish making the connections in the disconnect. And again, every disconnect's a little different too, like where the line ends come in, where the line outs are. You just got to make sure you read the instructions on your particular disconnect. You should have line, in coming in, and then you should have a load, a couple that you come off of. And mine's a non-fusible disconnect. It's just got the pull on it. I've got a breaker inside right within, 15 feet of this. I will probably never even use this disconnect. I'll probably just flip the breaker. Still at 280, and it is 143. So been almost an hour. Micron gauge is staying steady. So that's going to cause me to say I'm going to go for it. Again, that's probably not the way an HVAC tech would check for leaks. They're probably going to put nitrogen in here, but I don't have all that. It was going to cost me quite a bit of money, and I just decided I'm going to say it's okay. So taking off the caps, then I'm going to take Allen key. I think this was a 4mm, and just start releasing refrigerant. You want to back that all the way out until it stops. It's not something that, like, if you go too far, it's going to pop out on you. You just keep doing it till it stops, and then move back up to the other line and do the same thing. Now I'm going to unhook that. I was probably a little bit slow. I get a little bit of refrigerant, but you don't want to unhook that until after you release the refrigerant, because based on videos I watched, again, I'm not an HVAC tech, they say that you will actually pull, since it's on under vacuum, it will pull all that pull some stuff into the unit while you are unhooking that, if you do that before you release the refrigerant. So putting the cats back on. Making sure I tighten those up. Then I go inside and get some soap. I put a little bit of water in there with it as well, and just start going over all the connections, see if I'm getting any kind of bubbles or anything like that. I do this again even after I start it up and have it running for a little while too. I don't see any bubbles, so hopefully I'm good. Check the inside connections as well. They actually sell real leak detector stuff for this. I didn't have any of that, and then I also don't have a leak detector that picks up refrigerant like this. And so if you have some of those tools, again, an HVAC tech might have that to check it out. So I flip on the breaker on the inside, and now I'm going to go out and put in the disconnect to power up the outside unit. I think it has a 3-minute delay for a startup from no power, so it's going to take a little bit for it to come on. I go inside and put the batteries in the remote control, and then from that point, apparently either I turned off my recorder or I think I ran out of battery, so I don't film any of the cleanup process of buttoning up some things, but I'm going to walk you through that here. So I just went back and checked out the last video that was recording. My battery died. Luckily, I don't think I missed too much. So essentially, I had just put the refrigerant in the lines. I went and got soapy water to put on the connections to see if I had any bubbles. And then I came inside to start up the unit. I powered everything up. Now I'm inside. I started up at about 212. It's now 240. It was 55 degrees in here. Now it's already 66. So the indoor unit's running. Some nice warm air blowing across my face. Feels amazing. So we're going to wait and see, how high I can get it in here. Basically, I've got it set to 83 degrees just to see how hot I can get it. That's not what I'm going to keep it. Now this unit has a lot of you know, different ways. Like I was kind of sad I had to move it all the way to this side, but it allows you to change like the wind direction up and down this way, and then I'm moving it all the way that way. That way it's kind of blowing towards my workbench and stuff. So that's going to be nice. Well, while I was waiting on that to kind of heat up and see how hot we could get it in here, let me shut this door again. I basically was buttoning up some stuff out here on the outside unit. So no real install type things. I did put some of this HVAC tape. This is that insulation tape. This wasn't provided. They do provide you with some white tape, but I went ahead and wrapped everything with that, put the cover back on, got all that buttoned back up. This was actually meant to go on the inside wall, but again, I'm not coming outside with my unit from like out the wall. So I decided to go ahead and use this out here. I just put some big stretch on the back side and stuck that on there. I figured that looks pretty good. If it doesn't last, I'll change it to something else. And then inside here, I don't think I filmed any of, you know, strapping this line set off temporarily to the wall. I'm gonna get some smaller straps, but I was just using that to hold it in place. So I've got it running up. Now this drain line is something that I'm gonna have to deal with some sort of way because it's only like 6 foot long, and because I'm not going out the outside wall, that's not long enough to get me outside. So I'm gonna basically connect some PVC in here at some point, run it along this wall with everything else, and then I'll probably pop it out right in this area right here. So that's what I'll end up doing at some point in time. I don't have the stuff, so I'm not gonna do it in this video or install it. And then the only other thing I did, they do provide you with a little sleeve of extra, you know, insulation to put around your connections right there. So I did that, and then I also used some more of that tape right there. So ultimately, I just buttoned up everything while I was waiting for that temperature to go up. I thought it was recording during all that, but apparently it wasn't. But I'm basically gonna let this run for a little while. Again, right now it is 243. Up to 68 degrees now. We'll see what time it is whenever I get, you know, up there in that 83 degrees range. We'll kind of see what that is, and then we'll jump back in and I'll close out the video. All right, everybody, it is 3:45. It says that it is 75 degrees on this thermometer right here. If I actually open up the app itself, it says that it's 78 degrees. You can see right there. So plenty hot. I'm not going to wait for 83 degrees because I'm burning up right now out here. I'd have to go in there and change clothes. If it gets anywhere near this with heat, I'm going to be ecstatic because I'm never going to run it even at 75 degrees. We'll have to wait until summertime gets here to see how well the AC holds up. So maybe I'll give an update about that then. But overall, first impression of TOSOT, I feel like the indoor unit looks good. The outdoor unit, once I got that buttoned up, looks good. The install was not that bad. They have pretty much everything that you need for the most part as far as the materials wise. Now again, there were some tools that you're gonna have to buy that, you know, those things aren't included. The install, I didn't find to be that difficult. However, I am a mechanically inclined person, even though I'm not an HVAC person. There's several things that I know an HVAC tech would do that I didn't do, like, you know, basically fill your line set with nitrogen to check for leaks and stuff like that. You know, I wasn't going to go to that big expense. I basically spent the extra money on a micron gauge and used that way, even though again that's not best practice, but you know, that's what I decided I was going to do. And then I also used some other materials outside of what even TOSOT gives you, just because it's a preference thing of mine. And again, my install was completely different. You know, this isn't an outside wall right here. I had to go through, so that's why I'm doing it as a just watch me install it type thing, not a how-to, because every instance of this is going to be a little bit different. But again, back to the unit itself, it is a 12,000 BTU, 230 volt unit. They have higher BTUs. They even have one with an ERV. I didn't get that one because again, I'm not going out an outside wall, so I would have had to figure out to get that, you know, fresh air intake and outtake and all that stuff from here all the way to outside. I don't feel like I need that in my garage, so I didn't get it. But outside of that, the tools that I did get was a vacuum pump. Again, I got a micron gauge. That was the most expensive thing that I bought. Bought myself another set of gauges, even though I do have a set over there around the corner. I'm going to use these just for vacuums. And then I did buy some adapters and stuff as well. This is the tape that they provided. I didn't use this. I've seen that on a lot of people's, and it kind of changes color over time. I didn't really care for that, so I'm just using this insulated HVAC tape right here. That's what I wrap my line set with. But again, that's just a personal preference of mine. And then they do supply you with the power cord to run from your disconnect to the unit itself in the same type of cord as the one that goes back and forth from the indoor unit to the outdoor unit. I didn't use that. I used a whip with 10 gauge wire in it just because I like the liquid tight a little bit better as far as looks wise and stuff like that. So I went ahead and installed that as well. Again, you're going to need the nylog for your connections and some soapy water as far as to test for leaks once you release that refrigerant. But overall, I am super happy with it. Thank you again, TOSOT, for sending it out to me. I definitely love the heat in here right now. I'm about to come out of this jacket, and I really look forward to the summertime to see how well the cooling works, because sometimes, again, I don't necessarily need this just in general while working. I can run fans and stuff like that, but it's way too loud to run those fans and film videos for tool reviews and stuff like that. So it's going to be nice because that is really quiet. Like, I can't even hear it right now. So super nice. Appreciate it again, TOSOT. Appreciate all you watching. If you've got any questions, drop them in the comments below. Again, I'm not an HVAC person, so there's definitely some stuff I'm sure I didn't do that somebody would, but hopefully you can get something out of it anyways. Hopefully it's helpful in some way. You guys stay safe. Have a blessed day. I'll see you on the next video.